Okay, so welcome to another feature, the Ayn Rand Centre UK, discussing the characters of the Fountainhead. And I'm absolutely delighted this evening in the UK, this afternoon in the States, to be joined by Shoshana and Andy. And this week we will be discussing Peter Keating. Peter is, I don't know, how would we say this? Peter is, a dominant main character in the story and an amazing conduit for showing pretty much how the psychology of so many people out there in the world. And I think that's why he's so prominent and a tragic, sad character who I've noticed when I speak to people about the Fountainhead and people who have read it, the odd client of mine who has chosen to read it often sympathizes with Peter Keating to begin with, or identifies with him. And I think maybe we could start there. So maybe Shoshana, what do you make of me saying that, and what does Keating bring up for you in the context of this episode?
Okay, well, I think there are a few ways to talk about Keating as a character and the way that readers relate to Peter Keating. One of them, of course, is that from the beginning, especially if I'm doing this in a classroom with students, he's a successful student, or at least he's a superficially successful student. And so sometimes people even start out by thinking, well, I guess he must be the hero because one person is a top student and Howard Rourke over there has just been expelled. So this guy, so they're sort of primed to think, all right, he's a sympathetic character. We're interested in his story. Now, if you're alert, you notice that he talks about wanting to have a great career in oh hell, in architecture. And of course, Rourke doesn't want a career in oh hell architecture. He wants a career in real architecture. But so Ayn Rand has actually included, hints there that you might or might not catch onto. And I think that some readers might not notice that. They might be just following the notion that he's successful, he's hardworking, he's acclaimed. And so, yeah, okay, we're along for the ride with this sympathetic character. Also, I think that he actually does have a few genuine virtues, even though we see what happens to them in the course of the story. I think it's a good sign that if he wants advice, he goes to Howard Rourke, because as he tells him, you know more than those fools do about architecture. So he's not an idiot, okay? And he has been able to do some work. If he sought advice for his architectural designs, he knew the right person to ask, not an idiot. And he also is someone who, at some level, it is possible, is capable of honesty, even though that's not always what he does. So I think that's one reason why people might come in thinking, well, okay, he's a winner, I'm on his side, and notice that he's capable of honesty, even though he's not always honest. And I think that that's, of course, one reason why you could say he's got promise. It's also a reason why his failure to live up to that promise is heartbreaking and disappointing. So when we meet him at the beginning, and we meet him in a crowd, which of course, if you're being careful, you notice, oh yeah, he's defined by the crowd. He cares about how people would look at him. And then of course, we meet his mother. His mother is not a very impressive person. I think you could say that even his second-handedness, he gets second-handed from his mother. His mother has been training him to think about other people. She thinks about other people. She thinks about how other people would look at him. And yet he wants to talk to Howard Rourke instead of his mother. So he's a young person. And I don't think we want to think of someone as young as being damned forever or completely set in his ways. So I think these might be some reasons why people might be somewhat sympathetic to Peter Keating, even though I think as you read along, certainly as, well, you read about the way that he tries to please. He's described as being a sponge. And of course, we see in a lot of ways that he doesn't just take advantage of Rourke, but both takes advantage of him and also denigrates him and tries to make Rourke be like him. So part of what I think is good about the character as a characterization is that Ayn Rand gives you different sides to him. So he's not just Johnny one note, but what holds it together, what you're looking for is, well, what's fundamental? if he has to choose, which way is he going to go? And unfortunately, what we see many times through the novel is that when it comes to an actual choice and sticking by his values, he doesn't do it. I think this is especially prominent, with his relationship with Katie.
Yeah.
Which is, young woman he loves, and he gives her up. And I think that the reader's very interested in this, and we're interested in it not primarily from the point of view of the harm to her, but of the harm to him, which we can see coming. And so if there's any place where I think people who've been rooting for him jump ship and might be more inclined to, well, there's no way really to justify what he's done here, or as he ultimately realizes what he's done to himself, that would be a point where they have to check out and realize, no, this is not someone on whose side I want to be. I guess I'd say one more thing in relation to the question of people identifying with him. Sometimes people say, well, I can't be Rourke, so I've got to be Keating. Okay. And well, there are all kinds of reasons why people might say I can't be Rourke, including that Rourke's a genius. I'm not a genius. And if you think that to be Rourke, you've got to be a genius, well, I'm not a genius, so therefore I've got to be something else. Of course, being Rourke in one's soul doesn't have to mean being a genius. And it's also true that there are other choices in the world other than being Rourke and Keating. But fundamentally, it does come back all the way to the beginning. And I've taken a long answer, but I'll take us back to the beginning. Our opening image of Keating is in the crowd at graduation, being applauded for the pleasing things he's done, versus Rourke on his own, out in nature, laughing at the fact of what's happened to him, that he's been expelled, and that he's not Peter Keating. So that's a stark difference. But as you actually get to know Peter Keating, you realize that, well, it's fundamental that he cares about other people, but sometimes he's got a self he could listen to, and his own judgment tells him things that are not the same as what the crowd would tell him, including the fact that he thinks that Rourke knows something about architecture. I think that's a really good indication of his having independent judgment. Even though, of course, as Rourke says, you made a mistake by asking me for advice, you need to know for yourself. Well, I would say if you're going to ask anyone for advice, asking Rourke is a good thing. And Peter Keating possibly at this point is not equipped to make his best decision without getting more information, and Rourke is a good place to get it. So he's like Rourke in the sense that we can see from the beginning the seeds of what he's going to do later, but he's also someone in whom we can see different strands, which is not the case with Rourke. He's got integrity. Rourke has got integrity. He's all of one piece. And maybe it's even the fact that Peter Keating doesn't have integrity that could explain how it is that some readers are drawn to him. Maybe they're drawn to the good sides. And there is some good potential within Keating.
Andy, I see you nodding. What's
right? No, I think Shoshana's right, and I would just add that Keating tells Rourke, what Shoshana said, that Rourke knows more about architecture than the professors do, and then he adds, and I know that you love it more than they ever will. And I think that's also a positive about Keating, that he recognizes, passion for your work, the loving the creative action, the creative activity of designing. Keating recognizes that as Rourke's knowledge and his love for the field, and so he comes and he even says to Rourke, staying with that scene, he says, your advice means more to me personally. I probably follow the dean's, he says, but yours means more to me personally. And you see, Keating still has a self. Yeah. You also see that he's not going to have a self for long, because he's going to betray it. He's going to kiss up to the dean to get whatever to get high grades, to graduate summa cum laude, to get the job at Franken's, to get these kinds of scholastic and material advances, he's willing to, or commercial advances, he's willing to sell his soul. But he still has a soul at this point in this story. Rourke's advice, Rourke's thinking means more to him personally. You see the respect he has for Rourke. In fact, I think we can make a strong case that there's only two people in the universe of the Fountainhead that Peter Keating loves. One is Catherine Halsey, obviously, and the other is Howard Rourke. These are the two people he loves, and he betrays them both. And yeah, Keating is a cautionary tale. Yeah, he's the foil here. He's not a villain, although he does horrible things. I mean, he practically murders Lucius Hire. And so, he's a bad guy, but he's not the villain in this piece. Obviously, Ellsworth Toohey isn't a fascinating villain. Toohey is. I might write an essay one day that Toohey is the greatest villain in world literature. I don't even know that he has any rivals. Like who? Iago, maybe? I don't know. Toohey's an extraordinary villain. Keating's just a foil. He just shows the opposite of what Rock is, and he's in love. There's two real passions of his life, art or painting as his career, and Catherine Halsey as the love of his life. And it's like Shoshana said, you wonder what his life would have been like if he had made better choices. If he had told his mother, no thanks, I'm not interested in being an architect, it bores me. And I don't care if painting is bohemian lifestyle. I don't get any social respectability. It's what I love. And then, every time I read the Fountainhead, he's got Catherine Halsey, practically waiting for him at the altar, right? When Dominique shows up and says, now's your chance. And I'm yelling at Keating, send her away. Send her away. Tell her no, go away. Rock will be happy with her. You won't. You'll marry Catherine. And the dumb idiot, he never listens to me. He always does the same stupid thing every time. He betrays. Once he's given up painting for architecture, his career, he's condemned himself to decades of tedium in his career. And the one place long term where he could achieve fulfillment and happiness is in romantic love. And the good news is, of course, he has the right woman for him. Catherine is honest, and she loves him, and he loves her. And you could see Ayn Rand shows they'd be happy together. And he betrays her for Dominique. The same reason, and notice it's in both cases it's for the same reason. His mother's convinced that painting's a bohemian lifestyle. There's no respectability in it. She wants, social respect above all. Architects, at least successful ones, they have an office on Park Avenue, and they get their client base off the social register, and they wear, double-breasted, pinstripe, navy blue suits, and they're respectable. And so Keating gives up the passion in his career, not only for what mommy wants, but for, what mommy expects, but what mommy expects that society expects. So he basically gives up love for social acclaim. Well, he does the same thing in romantic love. Catherine doesn't impress anybody. But when Keating walks into the Four Seasons or Lutece or some 5-star New York City restaurant, which you can't do right now, but back then, you walk into some 5-star New York City restaurant with Dominique Franken on your arm. I mean, that's like walking into, a restaurant with, Scarlett Johansson or, some top, some top movie star, or Jessica Chastain, so one of my favorite actresses. And every head in the place is guaranteed to turn and go, ooh, look who he's married to. And it's for those few seconds of ooh from the yokels that Peter Keating sells the last element of his soul. After that goodness, that virtue that Shoshana accurately pointed out to, that we see in the opening scene, that's the last piece of his own distinctively personal soul is left. There's no more I there. His values. I mean, myself is defined by my values, and his values were painting and Catherine Halsey. Those are the two, paramount values of his life. If you delete your primary values from yourself, you delete yourself. There's nothing left there but a sponge that just picks up what other people say, want, believe, and does. And he's an empty shell. There's two heartbreaking scenes. Again,
Andy, I want to the heartbreaking scenes I want to get to a little bit later.
Okay, just to mention them though. We meet Catherine Halsey on the street later, and of course when he brings his canvases to Rock.
Absolutely.
Right. I was just going to comment also on Dominique. The mother plays a role in that, because the mother says, if you scorn Dominique and marry the gutter snipe, then Franklin will pick someone else as his partner. And Mother has been playing this game forever. He'll pick Schlenker. No, not Schlenker. He'll pick Bennett. No, not Bennett. And that's, unfortunately, it's a way to get Peter Keating to do something, to think, oh, you know, other people will get it instead of me. And as if somehow that confers value on it and disvalue on him. So it's both giving up Katie and choosing Dominique, and his mother being involved, in fact, in both of those. And, you know, even Tui's involved, because Tui wanted to ruin the romance. He made fun, you know, Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, of, you know, Keating and Katie. And so one of the ways you can tell that the Keating and Katie relationship has something going for it, you know, really, is that Tui's against it. Right. Because I know we'll talk about Tui later, but Tui is the great dream killer. You know, he's the enemy of values. And so if he sees a value, he wants to destroy it. And so even if maybe for some of us, we might think, well, Katie's not a perfect match. Well, but for Keating, she is. You know, she's the one.
Right.
And that's, in a sense, that's very personal. And Tui knows it. And Tui doesn't want anyone to have anything that makes him or her happy.
I mean, I'm glad that you both brought up values, and also at the beginning there, Andy, you mentioned at the beginning of the story, he has a self,
right,
or a partial self, and you know, Keating is probably the client that I see the most in my work, and it in the context of self-esteem, and this is something that I'd like to explore with the two of you. You know, self-esteem asks two questions of you: am I able, and am I worthy? And so many of my clients are very able, and I think Keating is able. You know, he's able to do life, but he is lacking that worth because he's trying to get his self-esteem from others all the way through the story. And I think, you know, he is the character, as I said, I see the most. I see so many people who they betrayed their values, their top values, and the values hierarchy, and making that explicit is the only real way to bring people back from that brink. But in terms of Keating, why is he so unworthy? And Shoshana, Andy's gone for the moment, sure. So maybe you could, you know, why is he so unworthy? He's able, you know, he can do. He's got the skills for life. He can read and write and converse.
He can read and write, but he can't. He's not going after what matters to him.
Yeah.
And we don't live our lives by formulas of, you know, a checklist that someone else makes up, but of the things that matter to us, and the things that matter to him, he's not going after. And I know you don't want to talk about that later scene, but that's where he defines it's so hard to really want something, and that there were things he really wanted and he didn't go after them. I think a way to think about it, you were talking about hierarchy. It's actually, I'm sure you know this, but yeah. Abraham Maslow.
Yeah, his hierarchy of needs. Yeah.
Okay, but he knew the Fountainhead. He put that into one of his books. He said, we see this in the Fountainhead. It's in Motivation and Personality in 1954, you know, so way back. So it may be one of the first academic type understandings of that particular psychological point. And he talks about self-esteem, and he says genuine self-esteem is based upon capability, and he doesn't use the term pseudo self-esteem, but he means, you know, it's not the real thing when people are trying to derive some sense of value from other people. And I think that part of the problem with Keating is that he's got some things he knows how to do. He can read and he can write and he can talk to people and he can remember what they like and so on. But what really matters to him are the value he didn't pursue painting, and the value that he gives up on Katie. And that's what really matters to him, because he's worried he could become the partner of Franken, but he's worried that might not be enough, because he knows it's not what he actually wants. And that's why he looks at Frank and he says, you know, and he's worried when Franken says to get to my life, end of my life, and think that it wasn't enough. And he wants to think that it's enough for Franken, as if somehow that would mean it would be enough for him, which means that at some level he's not in touch with what he really wants. And that's why all the way through, whenever he's by himself, those questions come back. And that's even there in the beginning of the book, when he remembers how his mother wanted him to give up painting and to be in architecture, and questions he has about it, but no time tonight for the questions. And you could even say, and maybe this is relevant to your the people you work with as well, that you need to listen to those questions. Okay, if you've got questions about what you're doing, listen to those and don't just get back on the track and go along towards something that is not necessarily taking you where you want to go. And so for him, he needs to pay attention. Wait a second. Why is it that it's oh hell architecture? It's not too late. He's young, he's early 20s. Why is it that he feels that he and Catherine need to get married tonight before something else happens? Well, he doesn't know that he's in a novel and that Dominique is about to ambush him, and the plot's going in a different direction. But I think he's got some sense that he could hold on to this now, and that it's hard to hold. It's going to be, and he's someone, it's hard for him to hold on to things. He needs to learn how to do that. And of course, I mean, it's very, very powerful. It's in the third part where he is talking to Dominique and she's revealing to him that he doesn't really want any of the things he says he wants. And he says, you're not expressing any preferences. Where's your eye? And she says, where's yours? And then he thinks. And it's a time when he's actually trying to get in touch with who he really is. And it's quiet. And the two of them are there and he's understanding it. And then the phone rings and it's hello, Ellsworth. And we're off to the races again, and he's lost it. You see, what Peter Keating needs to do is to hold on to the things that matter to him and to place them first, and not just for a minute, but always, to work toward them. And that's hard for him. It's easier for him because that's, it's mental work, it's emotional work, it's volitional work. It's easier for him to default to what other people say, even though you would think that there'd be a learning curve and he'd realize this isn't making him happy. He just, doing what mommy says, well, he checks off what mommy says and now he's done it. To have professional success as defined in a certain way, membership in the architectural organization, winning a contest with someone else's design, but no one needs to know that. He's checked off the box, and it's as if he did it. So I think, I don't know about people you work with, but there has to be, well, to not be Peter Keating, you need to know what you want and to put that first.
Yeah, that's the turnaround. But what's really interesting, which is you see displayed in Fountainhead, is it's almost like in modern terms we talk about codependence, and we talk about codependence as defined by two things: caretaking of others and self-denial. And he fits those in certain ways. But codependence is also considered now on the addictive spectrum. And addiction is a progressive illness in that context. And so you see, like, the addict needs a bigger and bigger and bigger hit. And in a way, Peter Keating needs a bigger and bigger self-destructive hit to keep getting. It's progressive. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And it kind of explains, the pathology, his pathological thinking. It just unwinds like that, and you really see it. Yeah.
You know what the drug is, though. The drug is TUI.
Yeah.
The drug is TUI. It's even there, in the Ellsworth TUI section of the book, that after people had him for a while, they can't live without him.
Yeah.
Like a drug. Of course, it's a toxic drug. It's dangerous. It's bad for them. But it's, well, I'm not an expert on drugs, but with Keating, boy, he was already in bad shape. But once he reads TUI's column and TUI's column of praise, this is just a wonderful thing to him, as if it's got reality, as if he's gotten a good grade from someone who knows. And then when he hears that TUI's been shot, oh no, is the column going to appear anyway? What is that? So he really needs TUI's acclaim, because TUI is, he's the imprimatur, he's the voice of society, and so on. And that's why he falls for TUI. And oh, it's so terrible, Keating. By the way, one way, sometimes when I teach the book and people talk about being sympathetic to Keating and so on, one place where sometimes, even if everything else has not made a difference, where people sometimes do recognize there's a problem here, is when Tui starts talking to Keating about the temple of Nike Apteros. Okay. And Keating's thinking, so what the hell is the temple of Nike Apteros? And then he says, oh yeah, it's always been my favorite. And Tui looks at him and says, yeah, I thought you'd say that. Now Tui's got him, because Tui knows he's dealing with a liar.
Yeah.
And I sort of suggested, I said, now think about that. What does that mean? Not only that he's faking the knowledge he doesn't have, but that the other person knows he's faking it, and on we go. And do you want to live like that? I mean, any minute someone can expose you. And you've exposed yourself to yourself and to your interlocutor. You're not living your own life anymore. You're living and it's not the end of the world if you don't know what the temple of Nike Apteros is. You can look it up, but it is, in a certain sense, the end of the world if you're faking knowledge that you don't have. Because how are you going to know you know anything? Oh yeah, I know what the temple of Nike Apteros is. Somebody said I knew it. No, you don't know it unless you actually know it. And then you're not holding your own knowledge. You're not living your own life. You're not a person anymore. And essentially that's the process that Keating goes through, and it's there all over the place. You know, when he speaks at the trial and then he stops speaking and leaves, it's as if no one is left. Right? As if nobody's walked out. And I think that there's a kind of self-erasure which goes along with the addiction to Tui, the addiction to fame, the addiction to superficial success, and that the recovery would be honesty, and the recovery would be values and living up to the values. It could even be if he spent more time with Rourke and didn't have to push him away, because it's sort of as if he can't both be the fake self and the self with Rourke. He says he always felt this person he had to speak the truth to, like Katie, which is why it's true, you know, that he's in love with Katie and he's in love with Rourke, that he speaks the truth to both of them. He talks about with Rourke that it's a command to rise. Well, I don't think Tui feels any command to rise when he sees Rourke. You know, Tui, so Keating, Tui, not the same. And actually, while I'm mentioning it, I mean, it's almost really obvious, but command to rise is what Keating says about Rourke, because he's got something in him that could rise. What does Tui think when he first sets eyes on Howard Rourke? He thinks of what would happen to his body if he went out the window and fell. So he thinks about, yeah, that's Tui. He looks at Rourke, and there's not enough world in this room for both of us, and I can't live, you know, with him. So I think Keating's not Tui, and there's something positive about that. But of course, it also means that Ayn Rand didn't set this up as if everyone's just on a track and can't get off.
Yeah. We've been talking about Keating and Andy. You may have missed the last sort of 5-10 minutes, but about how in many ways Keating follows the path of a traditional addict. He needs a bigger and bigger hit to destroy his self-esteem. He needs a bigger and bigger hit, and Shoshana referenced that his drug is Tui. And something I was going to share with you, Shoshana, is that drug addicts only use certain drugs because they actually do something for them initially. There is a payoff, an initial payoff, and you referenced that beautifully. You said he gets that something from Tui immediately until he's enslaved by Tui, and you see that. And then in many ways, you know, Keating is shuffling around at the end of the novel, a bit like an alcoholic on the street who's lost his soul and lost everything, and it's very powerful. But as I was saying, Andy, Keating follows the codependent side of that cycle in terms of just using an analogy to addiction and recovery. Right, something I wanted to say there, and I wanted to bring you back in here and last time, Shoshana, when we were talking about Winand, one of the things we talked about is could Winand come back?
Mm-hmm.
And we discussed that, and you can watch that episode.
Oh, I've watched it.
Yeah. But in terms of Keating, is Keating redeemable? Can he come back? Can he have a final chapter of his life that could be happy, or better, at least okay. What do you think, Andy?
I think you're talking about from the end of the story for the rest of his life, right?
In the same way that we said, could Winan come back? And we said it was written
right.
no, but
and so Keating's roughly 40 or early 40s at the end of the story. I think Keating can have a more peaceful life now, less internally conflicted, maybe less dependent on acclaim from society and from TUI for any type of pseudo self-esteem. I see Keating painting, for the rest of his life, which is something that he loves. It gives him like he said, it gives him a sense of peace. Maybe maybe he meets a woman that I don't think he could generate any great passion for, but a woman where they could have some kind of romantic relationship, and even if it's muted, they'll never have the kind of passionate, romantic relationship that Rourke and Dominique have. But there's some romantic elements, and there's companionship, and they care about each other. I think Keating can have a peaceful rest of his life instead of the raging internal value conflict between what he wanted and what his mother and TUI and society expected of him. But he'll never have the kind of fulfilled life that he might have had he made better value choices earlier in life. Had he told his mother no thank you and pursued painting rather than architecture, and had he told Dominique the same and married Catherine Halsey, then Keating's life could have been very fulfilled. And God only knows what kind of a painter Keating might have been. Maybe Keating could have been a good painter. He probably doesn't have the creative genius that Rourke has, so he'd probably never be an equivalent in art that Rourke was in architecture. But still, he might have been a very good painter. More importantly, he would have been doing what he loves, and his life would have been fulfilled. His life would have been filled with passion. And I think the best he could do now is have a life filled with a certain type of serenity, a wistful, painful kind of serenity where the wounds have healed, and he's accepted that he's made these major errors, as he tells Catherine. And he's accepted that, and it's just kind of a wistful, sad, quiet, yearning, but a sense of peace that he's come to terms with it. But he'll never have the joyous, the fulfilled life that he might have had he made better choices earlier.
Well, first of all, because he's in this novel, and Ayn Rand didn't write The Further Adventures of Peter Keating, there's a sense, and she wasn't writing a novel that was going to feature Peter Keating except as a foil. So I think that we can make up an answer to it, but it's almost as if that's got to be an answer that's not just after the last page, but it's outside the purpose of the novel. However, having said that, we can say a few things, I think, about the painting. It is true that Rourke says it's too late. Okay, Rourke, he brings them to Rourke, and Rourke says it's too late. Now, I think there's some question as to what does that mean? Yes, of course, it's too late for him to be in painting what Rourke was in architecture, but that might have been too late when they were 15 because, he's not a genius. On the other hand, I think that part of what Rourke means when he looks at it, and he does spend time, is it's too late in the sense of he's been a secondhander so long, it's hard to be a creator. And even in this, where he's trying to recover, he's still touched by the way that he's lived, which is not good for him. On the other hand, people can live a lot longer and make better choices. And the fact that Rourke says that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only possible answer, because you remember, I know this is later Rourke, but Rourke also tells Winan it's not too late for him. Okay, that's Rourke's answer. It's not too late. What you think you've lost can neither be found or lost. And Winan turns him down. But so Rourke basically says it's too late for Peter to be a painter, but it's not too late for Winan to be my friend, and to have a life. Now, the fact that Rourke says that that's not the only answer. It could also be that that's the way it looks to him. And from a certain perspective, and maybe in some ways he's thinking, if I were Peter Keating, somehow, and I'd killed my soul. Would it be too late for me? If I were whining and I'd made that big mistake, would that be too late for me? But I think the question of whether it's too late for someone, maybe in some ways, even outside the novel and within the novel, it depends on the person, because Winan thinks it's too late for him. Winan thinks it's too late for him. And as far as Peter Keating, we don't know what he thinks. Okay. And I think he does very well when he explains to Katie about wanting. That's a pretty good speech. And there's even a little moment when she hears him. And she says, I remember. You know, and the rest of the time she's rushing around and eating the salad and all of that. And then she says, I remember. And so maybe it's not too late for her. It feels as if it's too late because, you know, her emotions are way underneath and she hasn't been in touch with her own pain. I mean, you talk about enemy of her own values. It's as if it happened to someone else, no self there. And that was something that she talked about with her uncle, right? And he told her to kill herself, you know, the self within her. And unfortunately she did. But I think that for Keating, he says something that can reach even her. And he certainly is speaking something authentic here, understanding about wanting, and that's a good thing. And he even understands about the deal with Rourke, what that was about. You're speaking my language now. So I don't know, you know, he's got to have a proper life now, and it is late. He's younger than Wynand, but it is late, and he's made a lot of soul-killing errors. The question is the extent to which he understands better and can do better and consistently after having habits of, you might say, intellectual and emotional and maybe even physical laziness. He needs to take charge, and he needs to have his goals in mind and to go after them. So I don't know, that would have to be another book. You know, that would be someone else's story. And Ayn Rand's story is not about that. She actually is using him, as you say, partly largely as a foil for Rourke, from the point of view of principle, but also from the standpoint of the story, because they start in the same place. And yet also Wynand is a foil also. They started in the same place and made different choices. So I guess I think Ayn Rand did a very good job with this characterization, because the very fact that you say, you know, people who say, yeah, I'm like that, possibly means that, you know, they know what it's like to be afraid, or to want something and not follow through on it, or to know better and do the wrong thing anyway, or to drift. Because you were mentioning before about his near murder of Lucius Heyer. He didn't exactly go there to cause his death. He went there to frighten him, maybe to frighten him into another stroke. But basically his purpose was, you know, here's the evidence. What are you going to do about it? So that, which is not good, you know, obviously not good. And part of what's so horrible is that it's almost as if he did several things in order to rise. And one of them was frighten someone, and another one was use Rourke's plans. These are both bad things. And he reaps the rewards, and he goes out and gets drunk because it brings him no happiness. He's done something terrible. So, I mean, I guess that's why I think the sense of, if he's going to have success now, it's got to be on proper terms and knowing what would actually make him happy, and not just winning the contest or being at the head of the firm. It's got to be something that actually matters, a real value, a real personal value.
I mean, one of the things that is coming to mind is, you know, I can imagine there's quite a lot of people who would have, you know, a lot of people read The Fountainhead as teenagers, and they read it, and Keating is a cautionary tale, because there will be a lot of people reading that as teenagers who will have a lot of Peter Keating's values.
And you know, mothers.
And mothers. And also, you know, Peter Keating represents what so many people are being told from left, right, and center, that, you know, you've got to work hard and be successful, but you've also got to do what everyone else wants you to do and not think of yourself, and that conflict going on. But I'm also wondering, you know, thinking that there are some people reading this book who will really identify with Peter Keating, and wondering, you know, when he presents the paintings to Howard Rourke and Howard says it's too late, I wonder how many readers are thinking, God, that's me. Is it too late? Or do you think they have the honesty to recognize that in themselves then? And I've always taken, not always, but another way I've seen it's too late to Peter is, I think, specifically because it's art and painting. And there is that, it takes such a long time to build up your craft, that if he, you can have talent, but if you don't foster that talent and create all the way through, you're never going to be good enough maybe for a career. And I've often taken it that way as well. He's saying it's too late, as in you could have maybe been good, Peter, but you've left it too late in terms of just even developing your motor skills, to be able to paint really well and see, and that takes a long time to become a really great painter. And they say like playing the guitar in your 40s is completely different to when you're a teenager. And I think there is an element of that. But
I think that's true, but I think it's also true. He doesn't need to be a genius. He could be someone who would certainly be better than a lot of painters you see who were proteges of Ellsworth Toohey, and they don't have craft and they don't have vision. So I think it's not quite like physical athletic skill that, if your muscles don't get trained at the right time, I don't know.
But I think
you can't do it.
There's an element of that that has always come to mind for me as well, in terms of just it's too late on so many different levels.
Well,
I think
go on, Andy. Yeah,
thank you. I think Rock is right in both cases about both Winand and Keating. And the reason for that is Winand's life has been, in part, very first-handed. He's been enormously creative. He created this whole empire in real estate and in journalism. He's kept alive his first-handed values in his art gallery, his love of Rock's buildings, his love of Rock, his love of Dominique. He's very alive, and I think Rock's right that it's for Winand. There's a choice here. It's a difficult choice, but like we were saying when we were discussing Winand, he sold part of his soul for that yellow press, scandal sheet empire. So the exact price of reclaiming his soul would have to be the full cost of the empire. That's collapsed now. Now he can make the choice to be, remember what Dominique says to him during the strike, Gail, what a great journalist you could have been. And read that should have been. This could be what his paper now could be, if he wants to stay in that field, could be what the New York Times claims to be. Certainly is not, but a real dignified, serious newspaper reflecting Gail Winand's values. The banner belonged to the masses, not to Winand. Now Winand could have a paper that belongs to him, but he chooses not to. I think for him it was possible. Keating's been betraying his soul. The poor guy's been betraying his soul for his whole life. There's nothing left in him that's creative and first-handed, whereas Winand has so much. So I think that creative spark that is dead in him, which doesn't mean the rest of his life is going to be painful. I think he's acknowledging it, and he will paint, and there's a quiet sense of satisfaction. He's got his cabin in the woods, and he's got his easels and his canvases, and he'll paint. There's a quiet, peaceful sense. But not the joyous sense of a real value, crusade. So, but I think the rest of Keating's life will be a lot better than the first part. But like I said before, not what it might have been.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that he's wasted years, and the years. It's not just that he hasn't moved forward, but he's moved backward, and he's automatized certain ways of thinking and of facing life that he's got a lot to unlearn. On the other hand, the honesty with which he faces Rourke, and he says, I'm a parasite. I've been a parasite all my life.
Right.
Good. All right. Now do something else. So he's got some insight. It's just he has to hold on to it. I don't think that Rourke blames him for not being able to stand up to all the people who are trying to mangle Cortland.
He doesn't.
Yeah, doesn't.
I think for Keating, the passion's gone. But the rest of his life could be, like I said, a kind of quiet, sad peacefulness, which is a lot better than, agony.
But I I think this is, I think we could talk about Keating for such a long time, because it's I think what was really interesting there, Andy, is when you said the poor guy. He instills a sense of sympathy in
Yeah,
spite of
right,
all that you see, that self-destruction and everything. That is that element of the poor guy.
right.
And
But see, that's pity. And
yeah,
remember, that word is actually used when he comes to see Rourke. And what kind of value system is it that would think of such a thing as good? Okay, it's
Right.
that we feel that way about him is not exactly to his. I mean, it's Ayn Rand's art creating that impression, but it's not good.
No, but he's not evil like Tui is. He's
No,
pathetic.
no.
He's,
yeah,
he's a pathetic character. I think Ayn Rand intended that, and she painted it brilliantly. And Rourke himself feels pity for him, and I think that's the appropriate response. Whereas Tui, is a killer. Tui's Tui's a spiritual murderer, and he's evil. And Tui could get run over by a bus. I'd be happy. I wouldn't feel sorry for him. He's just got his. Or if he got killed in pursuit of one of his victims, like with a blackmailer, one of his victims murders him. Stephen Mallory.
Stephen Mallory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would applaud that. He got what his just deserves. But if something like that happened to Keating, I'd feel bad for him, because the poor guy, although he did some really bad things, he's not evil. Whereas Tui is irredeemably evil.
so I think that's a great place for us to pause or stop on Peter Keating this evening. So thank you both for fantastic insight and riffing and your perspectives. I'm sure everyone watching this is going to get a tremendous amount of value. So thanks very much.
Hi.
This was fun.
Could I just say one thing quickly? Just
Go
because
for
I
it.
think it's interesting. Okay. And that's that Ayn Rand met someone when she was in her 20s who gave her the idea for Peter Keating, and it actually gave her the part of the novel, because she had Rourke. She knew Rourke. She knew Rourke from the inside, but she had the same question that Rourke has at the beginning of the book about what's the principle behind the dean? What's the difference between me and this other person? And Ayn Rand said it was like a light bulb going off when she met she met and talked with a young woman who was very ambitious, but who defined success in terms of other people. And she said, then I had it. So I think in some ways you could say that the novel starts with Peter Keating, which is why it makes some sense for that first part of the book to be Peter Keating, even though we don't actually begin with him as our first person. That Peter Keating has a lot to do with the Fountainhead being what it is, even though he's not carried through as the major antagonist in the way that Tui is.
You're right, Shoshana. Ayn Rand really captured the essence of the conformist here. And there's a lot of them out there. I taught business ethics for many years at Marymount College in the New York suburbs. And it was a weekend college. So the students were adults, mostly women. It was a women's school. And we used the Fountainhead as the main text. And one day, this woman who worked in corporate America, maybe she was in her 30s, she's reading the Fountainhead for the first time. She comes running into class, waving the copy. Her eyes are all wild. And she says to me, my boss is Peter Keating. She says that. I think Ayn Rand really captured the archetype of the conformist much better than Sinclair Lewis did, let's say, in Babbitt or anybody has ever done.
Yeah. So anyway, you could say that's a last word on Peter Keating, but it's also how Peter Keating, in a way, was the first word for the Fountainhead.
Lovely. Thank you for that. I think that's a lovely ending to this chapter or episode.